A police officer and his loyal K-9 were visiting a quiet military cemetery at dusk. Then they saw him, an old veteran kneeling alone before a grave. No words, just a trembling hand and a white chrysanthemum. But what he whispered broke everything. I kept her safe, even from myself. What came next unraveled decades of buried truth about war, love, and a father a son never knew he had. This story will shake you, move you, and in the end, restore something you may have lost: faith in second chances. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe every child, young or grown, deserves to know their parents' love, then hit that subscribe button. Because this tale, it might just change how you see family forever. The sun had barely pierced through the dense curtain of morning fog in Redwood Falls, Oregon, a quiet, pine-covered town where the air always carried the faint scent of sap and rain. It was late autumn, and the sky hung low and silver above the military cemetery at the edge of town. Frost clung to the grass like brittle lace, and the rust-red leaves of the maples lay scattered like old war letters, untouched but not forgotten. Officer Caleb Hart stepped quietly through the narrow gravel path that split the headstones into neat rows. A man of 32, with a lean build shaped by years of patrol duty and a face shadowed by something deeper than fatigue, he wore his standard navy blue sheriff's jacket zipped to the chin. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the base of his neck where the fabric met skin, and his gray eyes, always watchful, seemed sharper in the morning chill. His badge glinted dully in the overcast light, the number 174 reflecting like an echo of something older than him. Beside him trotted Shadow, his German Shepherd partner, a 5-year-old canine with coal-black fur tipped in gray and eyes that mirrored Caleb's own, intense, quiet, searching. Shadow had a deep scar along his right flank, a relic from a narcotics raid 2 years ago, but it never slowed him down. Loyal to a fault, the dog moved with a calm grace, ears twitching at every whisper of wind through pine needles. Shadow was more than just a partner. He was a bridge between Caleb's outer discipline and the grief he kept sealed inside. They stopped before a modest granite headstone engraved, Elaine M. Hart, 1959 to 2016. Love's quiet strength is never truly gone. Caleb knelt, brushing a few pine needles from the base. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. His voice had the gravel of someone who didn't speak often unless it mattered. "It's been 7 years. Still feels like yesterday." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a thermos cap filled with lukewarm coffee, her favorite ritual when they used to walk these hills. He poured it gently at the foot of the stone, like a quiet offering. Shadow sat beside him, tail resting across his boots, ears flicking once toward the far corner of the cemetery. Caleb noticed, following the dog's gaze, and saw him. A man stood about 20 yards away, partially obscured by the arching limbs of a willow tree. He was tall and weathered, perhaps in his late 60s, with broad shoulders slouched under a faded olive jacket that had once been military issue. His hair was steel gray, combed back neatly, and his beard was trimmed but unkempt in a way that spoke of a man who lived on the edges of habit. His boots were scuffed and muddied, and he walked with a stiffness that betrayed past injuries. He moved slowly, reverently, as if every step was a negotiation with memory. Caleb watched as the man approached Elaine's grave from the other side. He didn't seem to notice Caleb or Shadow at first. His eyes were fixed on the headstone with an intensity that made Caleb's breath catch. The man reached into his coat pocket and took out a single white chrysanthemum. His hands trembled. Not from the cold, Caleb sensed, but from something else. He knelt on one knee, his fingers brushing the name engraved on the stone. Then he whispered, just loud enough for the wind to catch, "I came back, Elaine. I kept her safe." Caleb felt Shadow shift beside him, low growl in his throat. Not aggressive, but alert. The man glanced up then, and their eyes met. "Can I help you, sir?" Caleb asked, standing slowly, voice neutral but firm. The old man rose with effort, brushing his hands against his pants. "Didn't mean to intrude, just paying respects." Caleb stepped around the grave, now standing within a few feet. "You knew my mother?" The man looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "A long time ago. She was the kind of person you don't forget." He paused, eyes clouding over. "Elaine saved more people than medals ever counted." Caleb tilted his head. "I'm Officer Caleb Hart. I serve here now." The man offered a faint smile but didn't return a name. Instead, he simply said, "She'd be proud. You carry her quiet." With that, he turned and walked away, his steps slow but certain. Caleb watched him disappear between the rows of stones, wondering if this was just an old soldier visiting a fallen comrade, or something more. That evening, back at the Redwood Falls police station, Officer Rachel Quinn tapped her pen against a stack of reports. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slim, with the sandy blonde hair tied in a tight ponytail and sharp green eyes that saw through most excuses. Rachel had a military past of her own, having served as a base medic before joining law enforcement. Her no-nonsense demeanor and quiet compassion made her both respected and misunderstood by her peers. She wore her trauma like a well-fitted uniform, never displayed, but always present. Rachel glanced up as Caleb entered the briefing room. "You okay?" she asked, nodding at the drawn look on his face. "I saw something strange at the cemetery this morning," he said. "An older guy. Seemed connected to my mother somehow, but he never said his name." Rachel raised a brow. "You're not the only one. We've had a few calls from the neighborhood behind the cemetery. Locals say there's an older man who visits the graves at night, always alone, never speaks to anyone." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I want to know who he is." Rachel stood, pulling her coat from the back of the chair. "Then let's find out." Outside, the wind picked up again, soft, steady, and filled with the voices of a past not yet buried. The morning fog had thickened over Redwood Falls, curling low across rooftops and creeping between the tree trunks like an old ghost retracing forgotten paths. The sharp scent of pine mingled with wet soil as Officer Caleb Hart drove slowly down the winding gravel road leading back to the cemetery. The defrost hummed inside the cruiser while Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed forward, alert and still. Caleb's fingers tapped the steering wheel in quiet rhythm, not from nerves, but calculation. He hadn't been able to shake the image of the old man from the day before, the way his voice trembled as he whispered at Elaine's grave, the way he walked like each step pulled at something buried deep inside, the way he never gave his name. Caleb had seen trauma before, in the eyes of both victims and veterans, but this was different. This man hadn't just known Elaine. He had mourned her like someone who'd never stopped loving her. He parked at the cemetery gate and stepped out, boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened earth. "Let's see if our visitor left behind any breadcrumbs," he murmured. Shadow hopped down beside him, tail low and nose already to the ground. They moved slowly through the rows of stones, Caleb scanning for signs, a footprint, a cigarette butt, anything. Near the edge of the eastern path, Shadow stopped suddenly, nose stiff in the air. Caleb crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Shadow took off in a slow, focused trot toward the tree line that separated the cemetery from a patch of thick woods. Caleb followed, his breath visible in the chilled air. The trees here were older, their trunks wrapped in moss and their branches heavy with early frost. About 20 yards in, Shadow halted, sniffed the earth, and began pawing gently at a mound of leaves. Caleb knelt down and brushed them aside. Beneath the decaying layer was something metallic, small, rusted, tangled in an old shoelace. He picked it up carefully. A military dog tag. The chain was broken, and the surface pitted with age, but the letters were still legible. T. Walker, O+, USMC. Caleb's heart gave a dull thump. That name. He looked down at Shadow, who gave a low whine, then sat as if waiting for confirmation. "You found something big," Caleb whispered. He pulled out a plastic evidence bag and sealed the tag inside. Later that afternoon, Caleb sat at his desk in the quiet of the Redwood Falls Police Department, the dog tag resting in front of him like a puzzle piece missing from a lifelong mystery. The radio hummed softly in the background, and the click of computer keys echoed from nearby desks. He opened his mother's personnel file again. There, buried among scanned letters and faded photos, was a document from 1989. A notation about a man presumed dead in an ambush near Camp Bastion. The name, Thomas Walker. He didn't remember the name being mentioned in his childhood. Elaine had spoken very little about the war. She had only ever told him that his father was killed in the field. No body, no grave, just a folded flag and silence. But the timelines lined up, and now he had a dog tag. Rachel Quinn walked past his desk, coffee in hand. She paused, noting the tension in Caleb's face. "You look like someone found a ghost in a file drawer." He looked up, holding the tag. "Do you know the name Thomas Walker?" Rachel, now in civilian clothes, gray fleece jacket and dark jeans, tilted her head thoughtfully. "Tom Walker? That rings a bell. There was an old personnel file that came through Central when I first joined. He was MIA, Camp Bastion. Rumor was he saved a whole squad before getting blown off the grid." Caleb nodded slowly. He might have been more than just a war hero. Rachel's brows lifted, but before she could ask more, the station door creaked open and a gust of cold air slipped in. A woman entered, bundled in a long wool coat, a burgundy scarf covering most of her face. Her name was Nancy Geller, the town's postmaster for over 20 years. Short and round-shouldered, with the silver hair always tied in a bun and a habit of carrying 3 tote bags too many. She waddled toward the front desk. "Excuse me," she said, voice gentle. "There's been someone loitering behind the chapel near the East Woods. I saw him again today. Same old man, always disappearing before I can ask anything. He's not hurting anyone, but it's strange." Caleb's pulse picked up. "Did you get a good look at him?" Nancy nodded. "Tall, gray beard, walks with a limp, always carries this ratty green rucksack. I tried waving once, but he just walked into the trees." "That matches the guy from the cemetery," Rachel said, glancing at Caleb. Nancy fished something from her pocket. "Also, I found this. It slipped from his bag, I think." She handed over a folded scrap of paper, edges soft from handling. Caleb opened it slowly. Just 3 words, handwritten in shaky ink. Camp Bastion, 1989. He stared at the words for a long moment, then looked up. "Thanks, Nancy. You've just confirmed something I wasn't ready to believe." Rachel leaned over his shoulder. "You think this guy is Thomas Walker?" "I think," Caleb said slowly, "he might be my father." The rain had begun just after midnight in Redwood Falls, a soft, persistent drizzle that clung to windows and darkened the sidewalks with memory. By morning, the storm had become a whisper, just enough to make the leaves drip and the pine needles glisten. Caleb Hart stood in his childhood home, a modest 1-story house tucked behind the old elm trees off Hawthorne Street. The warmth of the kitchen still carried hints of his mother's life. Lavender in the air, an old quilt draped on the reading chair, a faded family photo above the mantel where only 2 smiles remained. Caleb moved with slow, deliberate steps. He hadn't returned here in a while, not since the funeral. He had kept the lights on, the fridge stocked, the yard clean, but emotionally, he had sealed this place off like a tomb. Today, he came not just as a son, but as a man chasing the ghost of a name. Thomas Walker. He opened the hallway closet and pulled down the old blue shoebox, scuffed, water-warped at the corners, the one his mother had always kept locked. The tiny brass key still hung from a string tied beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. He hadn't touched it before, out of respect. Now, out of necessity. The box creaked open to reveal dozens of letters bundled in twine, photos yellowed at the edges, and one small envelope separated from the rest, its flap never sealed. On the front, in his mother's gentle cursive, "For Caleb. Only if he asks." Caleb sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the letter. "My dear Caleb, if you found this, it means I'm gone, and it means you're looking for something I tried to bury. I never lied to you, but I withheld more than I should have. If you ask about your father, please, my son, forgive me." His name was Tom Walker. He was not just a soldier. He was kind, stubborn, and broken in ways even I couldn't heal. We loved each other fiercely, and we lost each other too soon. When you were born, he was already gone, listed MIA. But part of me always believed he was still out there. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you chasing a man who might not exist. I wanted you to grow up with peace, not questions. I was wrong to think that peace comes from silence. Caleb lowered the letter, his jaw locked tight, heart pounding. The truth had always been there, just behind her silence. She hadn't been protecting a secret. She had been protecting him from a void. Shadow stirred under the table, sensing the shift in his partner's energy. The dog's head rested on Caleb's foot, grounding him. Later that afternoon, Caleb met Rachel Quinn at the Redwood Falls Library, a narrow brick building with tall arched windows and ivy creeping up its side. Rachel had called him with something she found that morning. Rachel stood near the microfilm station, her coat damp at the shoulders, holding a glossy 5x7 photograph with 2 fingers. "Found it in the local military archive records, medical unit, Camp Bastion, 1989. She handed it to him. The picture showed a group of 6 military personnel, mud on their boots, sweat on their collars. Centered in the group stood Elaine, younger but unmistakable, her auburn hair tied in a loose braid. Beside her was a man, tall, square-jawed, eyes like Caleb's. His arm was draped gently around Elaine, and his palm rested protectively on her stomach. Rachel pointed. "That's him, right?" Caleb nodded, his breath catching. "That's Tom. That's my father." Rachel studied the image again. He didn't look lost. He looked like a man with something to fight for. Caleb turned the photo over, scribbled in faded pen. "Bastion Med Team, March 1989. Our last spring." Rachel tilted her head. You know, if he survived, and she never knew, maybe he came back too late. Or maybe, Caleb said quietly, he came back and stayed hidden, for a reason. There was a pause before Rachel spoke again. "You're going to try to find him, aren't you?" Caleb looked down at the photo, at the way Tom's hand had rested on his mother's belly, as if he knew she was carrying his child. "He's already here. I just need to make him speak." The forest stretched endlessly ahead, thick with towering Douglas firs and skeletal birch trees dusted in cold fog. Redwood Falls had always been surrounded by these woods, ancient, hushed, and quietly alive. But today they felt different. The mist hung lower, heavier, and the air carried a weight that pressed against Officer Caleb Hart's chest with every step. It wasn't fear. It was knowing. Knowing that what he was about to confront might shift the ground beneath him forever. He moved slowly, boots crunching over twigs and damp moss, Shadow trotting silently beside him. The German shepherd, now on full alert, lifted his nose to the breeze every few minutes, tail swaying not with anxiety but instinct. Caleb trusted that signal more than any GPS. Shadow had led him this far, through false trails, over dry creek beds, and around rust-colored boulders covered in old lichen. And now they were close. A faint chimney smoke curled between the branches ahead. Caleb paused, eyes narrowing. There, nestled in a hollow of pine and stone, stood a small wooden cabin. It looked like something out of another century. Its planks darkened by rain and age, roof sagging under a patchwork of moss and dented metal. A single broken wind chime tapped faintly in the wind, like a forgotten voice calling through time. But what stopped Caleb wasn't the cabin, it was the large dog lying on the porch. The dog was massive, older, with thick gray fur and a muzzle turned almost entirely white. His ears drooped slightly, and his eyes, though heavy with age, still held a soldier's vigilance. He didn't rise but watched Caleb and Shadow approach with solemn, unblinking focus. Shadow's reaction was unexpected. Rather than posture or bark, he slowed, ears forward but relaxed. He gave a soft, almost inquisitive whine and walked ahead of Caleb without hesitation. The two dogs met a few feet from the steps, nose to nose. They sniffed briefly, then sat side by side. No growl, no tension. Just familiarity. It unsettled Caleb more than if they'd fought. A creak sounded from inside the cabin, and a shadow moved behind the warped glass window. Then the door opened. The man who stepped out looked exactly how Caleb had imagined him, and not at all. He was tall, maybe 6'2", broad across the shoulders but slightly stooped, as though life had pressed down on him over time. His beard was full but neatly trimmed, gray with streaks of iron. He wore an old military field jacket, threadbare at the elbows, and his jeans were tucked sloppily into weather-worn boots. His hands were large, scarred, calloused. In one, he held a tin mug of something steaming. His eyes, though, that was what caught Caleb off guard. They were the same gray as his own. "Didn't think anyone but deer came this deep in the woods," the man said. Caleb didn't answer at first. He just stepped forward slowly, watching the man's every reaction. "Name's Hart," he finally said. "Caleb Hart." A beat passed. The man gave a small nod, but no sign of recognition. "I'm with Redwood Falls PD," Caleb added. "Came here looking for someone who used to be Thomas Walker, Marine Corps. Last seen, Camp Bastion, 1989. The mug trembled slightly in the man's hand. Not much, but enough for Caleb to notice. "You were at Camp Bastion," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "I was at a lot of places," the man replied quietly. His voice was deep and rough, but not hostile. "So were a lot of ghosts." Caleb's breath caught. "You knew Elaine." The man didn't flinch this time. He looked out at the woods instead. "Yeah, I knew her. She was my mother." Silence stretched between them, long and wide as the forest itself. Wind stirred the branches above, sending a light rain of brittle needles onto the porch. "She told me my father died," Caleb said, voice low. "But she left behind a letter, and I've got a dog tag with your name on it, found just outside the cemetery." The man looked down at the dogs. Shadow and the older one, now dozing together like old companions reunited. "You have a good partner," the man said. "That's Duke with him. Been with me since he was a pup. He don't warm up to many. Never did." "I noticed," Caleb said, "except today." The man, Tom, Caleb was sure now, looked at him again. For a moment something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe. Regret. "Are you him?" Caleb asked, not moving. "Are you Thomas Walker?" Tom's jaw tightened. He took a long sip from his mug, then stepped backward into the doorway. "Not today," he said quietly, and shut the door. The sound of it closing wasn't loud, but it felt final. Caleb stood in the clearing for a long time after, watching the closed door, listening to the silence that settled like snow. Shadow nudged Duke, who responded with a slow tail wag, and they both returned to Caleb's side. He didn't pursue Tom again that day. He didn't knock on the door or call out. But something had shifted. He had looked into the eyes of a man who had once loved Elaine Hart. And whether he admitted it or not, Caleb knew. That man was his father. Redwood Falls had awakened beneath a sky the color of old steel, and the cold felt sharper that morning, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. At the edge of the forest, Officer Caleb Hart stood beside his cruiser, staring out toward the trail that led to the cabin. He hadn't planned to return so soon, but something had shifted after that first encounter. It wasn't just about answers anymore, it was about acknowledgement. And maybe even redemption. Shadow sat calmly at Caleb's side, tail flicking slightly against the wet gravel. The German shepherd had been uncharacteristically quiet all morning, as if sensing that what lay ahead wasn't a matter of law, but of blood and memory. The trip back to the cabin was shorter this time. Caleb moved more confidently along the narrow trail as though his boots already knew the way. When the clearing emerged, he paused. Smoke rose from the chimney again, and Duke lay in the exact same spot on the porch. His eyes flicked open, but he didn't rise. Only his tail tapped once against the wooden floorboard in a slow, lazy rhythm. This time, the door didn't creak open on its own. Caleb stepped onto the porch and knocked once. There was a long silence, then the sound of boots on old floorboards. The door opened a few inches, and Tom Walker's lined face appeared, unreadable as stone. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said. "I didn't think you'd let me in," Caleb replied. Tom didn't speak, but the door opened wider. Inside, the cabin was simple, but clean. A pot of something simmered on the wood stove, and shelves lined with tattered books covered one wall. There were no photos, no clocks, just a rifle mounted above the hearth and a battered green duffel in the corner. Tom moved stiffly, favoring his left leg, and gestured toward a wooden table in the middle of the room. "I have something for you," he said. From beneath the table, he pulled a plastic folder, yellowed and worn, labeled in faded marker, M. Walker, Bastion Med Records. "I found it buried in a box when I started remembering," he said. "Didn't make sense at first. Took years to piece it together." Caleb opened the folder. Inside were several pages of medical documents, some handwritten, others official. The first detailed a shrapnel injury, blast trauma, cranial impact. The second noted temporary amnesia, dissociative symptoms. The third, a transfer order. But the last page struck Caleb cold. Status, deceased. Body, unrecovered. Dated May 3, 1989. "You were listed as dead," Caleb murmured. "I was," Tom said, sitting down across from him. "The explosion took out half our unit. I was thrown clear, woke up days later in a field hospital run by civilians. No dog tags, no name anyone believed. They thought I was a local mercenary. Language gone, faces gone, just flashes. I didn't even know my own name." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, stunned. "By the time it came back," Tom continued, "I was back stateside. No family, no ID, just a ghost with a uniform. I remembered her, Elaine, but not where to find her, and I couldn't bring myself to try. I figured she moved on. Maybe that was mercy." "She didn't," Caleb said quietly. "She raised me alone. Told me my father died a hero." Tom looked away, throat tightening. "She deserved better." Caleb's hand tightened on the folder. "You should have come back." "I tried," Tom said, voice cracking, "but I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't the man she lost. Just a broken copy with blank spots." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb set the folder down and looked up. "So, why now?" Tom sighed. "Because I remembered something last year. A bench in the cemetery. Her laugh, her hands, and your name. I followed the pieces until I found her stone." "And me?" Caleb asked. "I didn't know she had a son," Tom admitted. "Not until I saw your badge." From the fireplace, Duke stood and stretched, then walked slowly toward Shadow, who had taken a spot near the hearth. The two dogs laid down again, back to back, as if they'd known each other in another lifetime. "I've got someone who needs to see this," Caleb said, holding up the folder. "Someone who can verify it's real." "Do what you have to," Tom said. Back at the station, Rachel Quinn sat at her desk surrounded by stacks of old reports and a mug of half-cold coffee. Her blonde ponytail had loosened throughout the day, and there were faint creases under her sharp green eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. She looked up as Caleb entered and handed her the folder. Rachel read through the papers in silence, then pulled out her phone. "I've got a guy at DOD who owes me a favor," she said. "Retired now, but used to run point on MIA files. He can verify whether this was real or scrubbed." 10 minutes later, she hung up the call and stared at Caleb. "Well?" he asked. "They scrubbed him," Rachel said. "Completely. No death certificate filed through the National Registry. No transfer to the VA. Just a deceased note on one internal database that no longer exists. The whole record's been buried like it never happened." "Why?" Caleb asked. "My contact said there were a lot of files like this in the late 80s, Rachel replied. "High-risk deployments. Some soldiers went MIA during classified ops. Cover-ups happened to protect strategic losses. He said Tom might have been part of something the government didn't want traced. So they erased him. Yeah, and he survived anyway. Caleb sat back in the chair, the weight of it sinking into his shoulders. He didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, or awe. Maybe all three. Rachel watched him for a moment, then softened her tone. You know what this means, right? You were never fatherless, just kept from him. Caleb looked out the window. Rain had started again, a soft tapping on the glass. I know, he whispered, and I think he's been kept from himself, too. The wind swept through Redwood Falls like a warning, sharp, fast, whispering through the pine trees and rattling the eaves of houses that had stood for generations. Officer Caleb Hart stood in the back room of the local medical clinic, a sterile space he had access to thanks to his position on the town's emergency response team. The overhead light buzzed faintly as he removed a small sealed evidence bag from his jacket pocket and placed it gently on the counter. Inside was the rusted military dog tag, T. Walker, O+. He unscrewed a vial containing a preserved sample of his own blood, drawn years ago for medical screening during academy training. Still legally on file, still viable. What he was about to do wasn't exactly by the book, but nothing about this journey had followed protocol. The clinic's night nurse, Janelle Coates, short and broad-shouldered with a calm demeanor forged from 20 years of ER trauma shifts, gave him a curious glance as she finished logging patient files. Her graying brown hair was tied in a low bun, and she wore purple scrubs that bore the wear of time and endless double shifts. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice even and maternal. "DNA isn't something you can unsee." Caleb nodded. "I need to know." Janelle opened a drawer, withdrew a sealed cotton swab and sterile gloves. "You'll have to overnight it to Salem. I've got a contact in the forensics division who owes me a favor. Quiet type, doesn't ask questions." Caleb gently scraped the edge of the dog tag with the swab, collecting dried blood or skin cells embedded in the crevices, then sealed it in a tube. He signed the chain of custody form with his badge number, sealing the envelope with quiet finality. As he handed the package to Janelle, a flicker of uncertainty passed across his face. Janelle offered a soft smile. "Sometimes truth hurts more than lies, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't know." 2 days later, the envelope came back. The letterhead read, Oregon Department of Public Safety, Forensic Lab Division. The results were typed cleanly, every line clinical and cold. But Caleb's eyes locked on a single sentence. Probability of biological paternity, 99.8%. He lowered the paper slowly, his breath caught. Shadow, lying beside his chair at the station, lifted his head as if sensing the shift in Caleb's heartbeat. Tom Walker wasn't a stranger who once loved his mother. He was Caleb's father. Rachel entered the office just as he folded the letter. "I was just about to call you," she said, tossing her keys onto the desk. Her face was tighter than usual, eyes more alert, movements a little too measured. "What is it?" Caleb asked. "We've got a tail." She didn't need to explain further. Rachel dropped a grainy photograph onto the desk. It had been taken that morning from the dashcam of her car parked near the cemetery. It showed a man sitting in a black sedan, wearing a dark coat, his head down as if reading something, but the license plate had already been traced to a restricted registry used by retired military personnel. "I ran it through a contact in D.C., she said. Name came back. Colonel Alan Brenner. Retired. Last post. Operations Chief for Special Recovery Teams overseas. Afghanistan. Early 90s. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "That's a name from the Bastion file?" "More than that," Rachel said. "He was Walker's last superior officer. Brenner's team was the one that declared Tom MIA. My guy said there were rumors of a botched operation. Something big. Civilian casualties. Intel failure." "And Tom's survival would have exposed all of it," Caleb muttered. "Exactly," Rachel nodded. "He wasn't just forgotten. He was erased." Caleb stood, the DNA letter still clutched in his hand. And now he knows Tom's still alive. Rachel crossed her arms. So, what's the play? Caleb looked out the window toward the hills beyond the town, toward the cabin hidden under the fir trees. We protect him, he said. Across town, parked 3 blocks from the Redwood Falls diner, sat the black sedan. Inside, Colonel Alan Brenner adjusted his coat collar and watched the quiet street through the fogged glass. He was in his early 70s now, but still straight-backed and clean-cut, with icy blue eyes and a face that had aged in hard, angular lines. He kept a thin leather notebook on the seat beside him, filled with scribbled notes and satellite printouts. He didn't smoke, didn't fidget, just watched. He had been the kind of officer who never apologized, because in his world, certainty was survival. Mistakes were buried, and Tom Walker had been the last mistake he thought he'd buried well. Now, a small-town cop had dug him up. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the evergreens, casting long golden beams across the hills of Redwood Falls. The air carried a late autumn bite, just enough to nip the tips of fingers and turn breath visible. Caleb Hart drove in silence along the forest road that twisted through the edge of town and into the trees. The envelope containing the DNA results rested on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. Shadow sat in the back, alert as always, but subdued, as if he too sensed what was coming. The cabin appeared just as it had before, weathered, still, the wood darkened by years of Oregon rain and isolation. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Caleb parked and stepped out, boots crunching over fallen pine needles and frost. As he reached the porch, Duke rose from his usual spot and gave a soft, expectant bark. Shadow moved ahead, the 2 dogs meeting in silence before settling together again, as if what was unfolding belonged more to them than anyone. The door opened before Caleb knocked. Tom Walker stood in the doorway, framed in shadows and warm firelight. He looked tired, as if memory had been wearing him down piece by piece. He wore the same flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, arms still marked by old scars and time. His gray eyes met Caleb's and, for once, didn't flinch. "I figured you'd come," Tom said. Caleb stepped inside without a word. The warmth of the fire was immediate. It smelled of cedar and something faintly metallic, like old tools and ink. "I got the results," Caleb said. Tom gestured to the chair across the table. "You don't need to tell me what it says." Caleb placed the envelope down anyway. "Says 99.8%. You're my father." Tom didn't move for a moment. He stared at the envelope like it was something sacred and cursed at once. Then he sat. The lines around his mouth seemed deeper than before. He folded his hands over the tabletop and let out a breath he'd been holding for years. "I always hoped," he said, "but hoping didn't make it right." Caleb's voice was steady. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Tom looked up, eyes glinting under firelight. "Because I didn't think I deserved to." Caleb waited. "I thought I died," Tom said quietly, "not just in that report, but in who I was. After the blast, after I woke up with no name, no memory, when it came back, it didn't come back like a flood. It came in shards. Flashbacks, a hospital bed, Elaine's laugh, the name Caleb, but I was broken, and I thought, maybe you were better off without the shell of a man I'd become." "You weren't a ghost to her," Caleb said. "She remembered everything." Tom closed his eyes. "I walked past your mother's grave for a year before I had the courage to kneel in front of it. And even then, when I saw your badge, I knew you were hers. I knew who you were, but I couldn't speak." Caleb's hands clenched slightly on the table's edge. "You followed me." Tom nodded. "Every night after your shift, I watched you walk that beat. You reminded me of her, the way you moved, the way you didn't rush. I saw your integrity before I ever knew your name." "And now?" Caleb asked. Tom looked at him, really looked. "Now I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Not as your father, not unless you want that, but as someone who never stopped loving the woman who gave you life, and someone who, for all his mistakes, never stopped watching over you in the dark." Caleb was quiet. He had come for answers, for truth, but the rawness in Tom's words, the crack in that weathered voice, cut through every barrier he'd built since childhood. Behind him, the fire crackled. Duke let out a soft grunt in his sleep. Shadow lay with one paw over the other, ears angled back slightly. "I don't know what we are yet," Caleb said, his voice rough, "but I think we're more than strangers." Tom nodded. "I'll take that." Later that evening, as dusk folded into a navy sky, Caleb stood outside the cabin. Rachel Quinn's cruiser pulled up at the edge of the clearing. She stepped out slowly, brushing her ponytail back and adjusting her jacket. Her expression was unreadable, but her green eyes missed nothing. "Thought I'd find you here," she said. "Figured you'd want to talk." "I always do," Caleb replied. Rachel leaned against the hood of her car, arms crossed. "You know, family isn't just blood. It's who stays when it's hardest, who chooses to walk beside you, even if they missed the start." Caleb gave a dry smile. "You always say the hard truths like they're coffee orders." She smirked. "It's a gift." There was a long pause between them, not awkward, just quiet. "I'm proud of you," Rachel said softly. "You could have shut the door on him. A lot of people would have." "He shut the door on himself long before I ever could," Caleb replied. "But I think he's trying to open it now." Rachel nodded. "That's all any of us can ask for." She reached into her coat and pulled out a flask. "Want some apple cider?" He raised an eyebrow. "That legal?" "I checked. We're off duty." They sat on the hood in silence, sipping from the flask as the stars began to blink into view, one by one. The trees stood tall around them, and somewhere in the distance, two old dogs lay sleeping beside the fire, breathing in unison, as if sharing the same dream. The light that filtered through the trees in Redwood Falls Cemetery that morning was soft and golden, the kind that didn't just fall, but lingered, stretching itself across gravestones, curling into the etchings of names and dates, and settling like memory on the skin. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of pine needles and dry leaves and something older, grief maybe, but softened now by time. Caleb Hart stood at the base of the hill, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, his gaze fixed on the small stone marker ahead. It wasn't a grand monument, just a simple gray headstone, polished smooth by wind and weather. Elaine M. Hart, 1959-2016. Love's quiet strength is never truly gone. It was the first time Caleb had returned not alone. Beside him stood Tom Walker, back straight despite the years on his shoulders, dressed in a pressed but old military coat. His hair was combed neatly today, and though he said little on the drive in, Caleb noticed the way Tom's fingers tapped slowly against his thigh. Restless, reverent. A soldier still unsure if he had permission to mourn. Behind them, near the tree line, Shadow and Duke lay close together on a small patch of sunlight. Shadow's ears twitched now and then, scanning the air as he always did. Duke's muzzle rested on his paws, eyes half closed, his breathing steady. Together they looked like two sentries posted on either side of a gate no one could see. Caleb cleared his throat. "I thought about what to say all week. Turns out, I still don't have the words." Tom gave a soft exhale through his nose, eyes still on the stone. "Maybe it's not the words that matter." Caleb nodded, then crouched slowly. He reached into the paper bag he'd brought and placed a single cup of black coffee, still warm, on the grass at the base of the stone. His mother's favorite. No cream, no sugar. Tom bent next to him, his knees creaking in protest. After a long silence, he placed one hand on the stone. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. "Even when I didn't know who I was, I remembered how you made me feel." Caleb placed his hand beside Tom's. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It held something sacred. Afterward, they sat beneath the wide pine tree near the cemetery's edge, just where the roots twisted out of the ground like an old staircase. The sun filtered through branches above, dappling the ground with golden circles. A thermos of coffee sat between them, untouched. Tom pulled from his jacket an old photograph. It was creased and faded, but the image was clear. Elaine in uniform, smiling, a younger Tom beside her, arm around her waist. "She always grounded me," Tom said. "I was never afraid of the war, but the idea of coming home, that scared me." Caleb took the photo carefully. "You came home, eventually. I'm just sorry I didn't come back in time to say goodbye." A soft rustle came from behind them. Caleb turned slightly, expecting to see Rachel Quinn's familiar silhouette approaching, but the space remained empty. Just trees, wind, and the last birds of the season. It was only later that day, back at the precinct, that Caleb found the envelope. It was tucked into the side pocket of his desk drawer. No name on the outside, just a soft fold. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Caleb. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not gone forever, just somewhere different. I've accepted a transfer to a regional outpost in the Cascade Range. Fewer people, more space. It's what I need right now. You've walked through fire, and you did it with grace. You didn't chase truth out of revenge, you followed it for love. That's rare in this world, and your mother would be proud. Some wounds don't close with time. They heal when you stop hiding them. I hope you and your father find that healing together. It won't be easy, but I know you'll both try. Don't wait too long to forgive, or to live. And Caleb, take care of yourself. I'll always be praying for you both. Rachel. Caleb folded the letter with slow hands, his thumb pausing over her name. He hadn't known she was leaving. He should have. But she always had a quiet way of stepping back when others stepped forward. Outside, the town rolled on as always. Shopkeepers unlocking doors, kids riding bikes through rust-colored leaves, an old man feeding birds from a bench. Back in the woods, 2 old dogs slept beneath a pine tree. And somewhere in the Cascade Range, a woman in a navy jacket looked up at a sky full of mountains, the wind at her back, and breathed in something like peace. Sometimes, the miracles we seek don't come with thunder or bright lights. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a letter never sent, a dog tag found in the dirt, a father's whispered apology beneath a pine tree. This story reminds us that redemption is never too late, and that even when we feel forgotten, grace has already begun working behind the scenes. God doesn't always heal with grand gestures. He often restores through people, through love, through second chances. Caleb and Tom's journey shows that no matter how broken the past may be, there is always a path toward forgiveness when the heart is willing. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the return itself, but the courage to open the door when it knocks again. So today, if you're carrying wounds, grief, or silence of your own, know this: healing is possible. Families can be restored. Hearts can be made whole. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with Amen if you believe in the power of forgiveness and second chances. Subscribe for more stories that bring hope, healing, and faith back into the light. And may God bless everyone watching this.
A woman with one paralyzed leg climbed a cliff to rescue a lost German shepherd. Then something unbelievable happened. A crisp autumn breeze rippled across the surface of the lake as the sun sank lower behind the golden-tipped trees. Mia sat on an old wooden bench near the water's edge, her sketchpad balanced carefully on her lap, pencil in hand. She had been coming here nearly every day for the past 2 years, since the accident that had taken her husband and left her with a paralyzed leg. The doctors had done their best: physical therapy, pain management, but their verdict had been clear: she would never regain full use of her left leg. Climbing, running, even hiking, the life she once shared with her husband, was over. Now she lived alone, in a small log cabin by the lake, tucked away from the world. She painted, she read, she cooked simple meals, but mostly she sat in silence, letting the grief and guilt settle like dust on her shoulders. She blamed herself, even though everyone said it was just an accident. The rope had snapped. No one could have predicted it, but she had been the one who tied it. That afternoon, she had just finished outlining the curve of a pine tree when a sound broke the quiet. A high-pitched bark, frantic and sharp. She froze, the pencil slipping from her fingers. Then came a whimper. It echoed from behind her, from the cliffs that rose behind the cabin, steep and jagged and forgotten. Mia turned, frowning, listening harder. The wind rustled the leaves again, then another cry, this time longer, edged with pain. She stood slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. The pain in her hip flared with each step, but she followed the sound, heart pounding. As she reached the clearing near the cliffs, her breath caught. There, wedged between two narrow outcroppings about 10 meters up the rock face, was a German Shepherd puppy. Its fur was matted with dirt and burrs, and one of its front legs dangled at an odd angle. It whined again, pawing at the stone, its hind legs slipping. The space it was in was barely wide enough to hold it. One wrong movement, and it would fall. Mia looked around. No one. No hikers, no passing cars, no voices. Just her. She swallowed hard. Her hand tightened around the cane. Someone will come, she told herself aloud, but no one did. She stared up at the dog, her stomach twisting. It was just a puppy, alone, terrified, injured, and it would die if no one helped. Her mind screamed the warning the doctor had repeated many times. You must avoid any strenuous climbing. Your pelvis is too unstable. A fall could damage the spinal cord further. But as the dog whimpered again, curling tighter into itself, something shifted in Mia. With slow, trembling hands, she tossed aside the cane. She tested the base of the cliff first, her right leg strong, her left dragging awkwardly behind. She gripped tree roots, crevices, even small rocks. She moved inch by inch, sweat already breaking along her neck despite the chill. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. She slipped once, gasping, scraping her elbow. Blood smeared the rock. Still she climbed. Minutes passed like hours. The puppy's eyes locked on hers, wide and terrified. Finally she reached it. Her arms trembling, she reached into the crevice and wrapped her hands around the shaking bundle. "I've got you," she whispered. But as she shifted her weight to descend, a rock gave way. They tumbled, not in free fall but in a sliding crash, down a soft slope of moss and leaves. Mia landed hard on her side, groaning, clutching the puppy tight against her chest. The world spun, then stilled. The puppy licked her chin. Mia let out a laugh, half sob, half relief. "We're okay," she whispered, voice cracking. "We're okay." The sky the next morning was streaked with soft gold as Mia stood at her kitchen counter, her hands trembling slightly as she cut gauze into neat strips. The puppy lay wrapped in a blanket beside the stove, still damp but warmer now, his breathing steady. His eyes fluttered open when Mia knelt beside him. "I should call someone," she whispered. "Animal control, a vet, someone more qualified than me," but she did not move. Instead, she reached out and gently turned the puppy's head to the side, brushing aside the wet fur behind its right ear. That was when she saw it. A faded black tattoo, almost obscured by the mud and matted hair. She squinted. The ink, though faint, was clear enough. SAR K92, her breath caught. "SARK, search and rescue?" She whispered it aloud. "Search and rescue?" Mia stood, her joints aching, and went to her desk. She pulled out her old laptop, dust clinging to the lid, and opened a browser. A quick search for SAR K92 returned nothing specific, no missing dog reports, no clear identification. But the acronym, it matched multiple military and emergency service designations. Back in the kitchen, the puppy had pulled himself up and was now attempting to drink water from the bowl she had placed beside him. His movements were careful, but not clumsy. Mia sat beside him and whispered, "Who were you?" She decided to name him Rocky, after the climb and the way he had survived it. Over the next few days, Rocky's injuries began to heal. Mia wrapped his paw each morning with antiseptic and gauze, replaced his water, and crushed mild pain medication into soft bits of chicken. The dog never growled, never barked for no reason. He followed her quietly, alert but gentle, like he knew exactly how close to stand and when to give her space. One afternoon, Mia nearly dropped a mug when a distant siren from town echoed across the lake. Rocky stood up instantly, ears sharp, tail straight, and let out a short, low whine. It was not fear, it was recognition. "He knows that sound," she whispered. "He's heard it before. A lot." More signs began to show. Rocky would nudge doors open with the side of his body, never scratching or pushing with force. He would sit by the entrance whenever he heard a car, even when it turned out to be only wind in the trees. He refused to sleep anywhere but beside Mia's bed, always facing the door. And Mia began to change. She found herself opening the windows, letting sunlight pour into the small cabin she had kept closed for 2 years. The canvases she had once stacked in the corner, unfinished, forgotten, she started to pull them out, brushing dust from their edges. Rocky would sit nearby as she painted, head on his paws, watching. Sometimes she would talk to him. About Ethan, her husband. About the trail where they had last stood together. About the way she had been sure she would never climb again. "I should have stopped him that day," she whispered once, eyes shining as she mixed paint. "I tied the rope too quickly. I always rushed." Rocky raised his head. He did not blink. He just looked at her. Mia wiped her eyes and smiled faintly. "You don't judge, do you?" She reached down, ran her hand through his now soft fur. Rocky leaned into her hand. It was the first time in 2 years she had said Ethan's name aloud. The scars Mia carried, some beneath skin, some rooted deep inside, began to feel a little lighter. Not gone, but not strangling her anymore. And somehow she knew Rocky was carrying scars too, but together they were healing. One slow, quiet day at a time. The wind rustled through the tall pine trees as Mia walked along the winding path of the town's largest park, her cane tapping rhythmically beside her as Rocky trotted quietly ahead. It had been weeks since the day on the cliff. The pup's coat now shone with health, his eyes brighter, his stride steady. But his alert posture never left him, not even when chasing a falling leaf. As they neared a clearing, Mia paused near a bench to catch her breath. Rocky sat beside her, panting softly, his ears twitching at the distant sounds of children playing. That was when a deep voice called out, "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your dog for a moment?" Mia turned. An older man in a weathered but neatly pressed uniform approached slowly. His cap bore the insignia of a canine search and rescue division. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but kind. "I don't mean to alarm you," he added gently, noting Mia's sudden stiffness. "My name is Frank. I used to be part of the SAR West Command, retired now. That tattoo on your dog's ear, I have not seen that code in months." Mia hesitated. "You mean SARK-92? Frank stopped mid-step. His eyes widened. "Yes," he said slowly, voice tinged with disbelief. "That was Valor's designation. He went missing during a mountain rescue near Haven Ridge 2 months ago. We thought he died in the landslide." Mia's breath caught. "Rocky, he was trapped between the cliffs near Haven. I found him by chance." Frank stepped closer, now crouched to Rocky's level. He let the dog approach him naturally, reaching out a steady hand. To Mia's surprise, Rocky stepped forward and sniffed Frank's hand. Then, after a beat, he sat. Shoulders squared, posture straight. Frank whispered, "That's his signal posture. We trained him for years to respond exactly like that. He remembers." A wave of emotion rose in Mia's chest. "You are telling me this dog was trained to rescue people?" Frank nodded, eyes glassy now. "He was one of the best. We partnered him with rookies because he could lead. The last time anyone saw him, he was running into the debris field to locate 2 missing hikers. Then the earth shifted. He never came out." Mia swallowed hard. "He did. He came to me." Frank stood up slowly. "We reported him lost in the line of duty. The entire unit grieved him. We never found a trace. Until now. Mia looked down at the dog, now leaning gently against her leg, tail wagging slow and steady. I named him Rocky, she whispered. But you called him Valor. Frank gave a bittersweet smile. He earned that name, but maybe Rocky is who he is now. Later that evening, Frank contacted the old SAR center and arranged for them to send verification experts. A medical officer arrived the next day to inspect Valor's old injuries. Scar patterns on the hind leg, a distinct ridge on the spine, behavioral responses to specific whistle tones. Everything matched. The dog she had pulled from the cliff with trembling hands, the soul she had risked reawakening, was Valor, the survivor, the rescuer, the legend. He came back, Frank whispered to Mia as they sat on her porch, and not by accident. Sometimes fate doesn't just save lives, it exchanges them. Mia looked down at the dog curled beside her rocking chair, breathing evenly. I saved him, she said softly, but I think he saved me first, before I ever touched him. In the quiet between them, something stirred. Not just healing, not just understanding. It was destiny, reclaimed and rewritten by two lives that were never truly lost. Beneath the pale autumn sunlight, Mia walked slowly along the dirt path that curved around the edge of the lake. Her walking cane tapped softly against the moist ground, its steady rhythm blending with the sound of rustling leaves. Rocky trotted faithfully beside her, occasionally glancing up at her as if to make sure she was still okay. Mia offered a small smile, the kind that had been absent from her face for years, but now returned with a fragile warmth. Come on, Rocky, she said gently, as they reached a narrow section of the path where last night's rain had turned the soil soft and slick. Rocky paused, sniffing the ground, his ears pricking up sharply. Mia took one cautious step forward, but the ground gave way beneath her foot. Her balance shifted. Her cane slipped from her hand. She tumbled forward. A sharp pain exploded at her hip. Then her head struck a protruding rock. The world spun. She landed awkwardly, half-rolled onto her side, breath knocked from her chest. Pain flared through her lower back, and when she tried to sit up, her left leg, paralyzed since the accident, refused to cooperate. She was stuck. "Rocky," she whispered, the word barely audible. But Rocky was already gone. For a few seconds, fear gripped her. She was alone. The trail was secluded, rarely used on weekdays. There was no one around. The wind tugged at her coat, and her vision blurred. But Rocky had not abandoned her. Several hundred feet away, in a cabin nestled among pine trees, Elias, a retired park ranger, stirred his morning coffee. He paused when a sharp barking pierced the calm. He frantically pierced the calm. He opened his front door to find a German shepherd on his porch, pacing and barking frantically. "Hey there, boy, what's the matter?" Elias stepped outside. The dog dashed a few feet away, then turned, barking again, eyes locked on Elias. Instinct kicked in. Elias followed. Rocky led him quickly down the wooded path, stopping only to make sure the man was still behind. Minutes later, Elias spotted a figure lying by the edge of a small slope, tangled in fallen leaves and mud. "Mia!" he shouted, rushing to her side. "Can you hear me?" She blinked, barely nodding. He immediately called 911. Paramedics arrived shortly after. They stabilized her neck and carefully lifted her onto a stretcher. Rocky hovered close, his eyes never leaving her. At the hospital, scans confirmed a lower back contusion and minor swelling near the lumbar spine. The attending physician told her gently, "If no one had found you when they did, the swelling could have worsened. You could have lost even more mobility, or worse." Mia stared at the ceiling, stunned. He came back for me. 1 week later, the local veterinary clinic held a small ceremony. Rocky, sitting proudly with his ears perked, was given a small engraved medal, "Loyal Companion Hero," for sensing, saving, and staying. A representative from the Search and Rescue Training Center arrived too. Valor, or Rocky as you call him, was trained not just to respond, but to care. He remembered everything, and when it mattered most, he remembered who needed him. When Mia finally returned home, Rocky was already waiting on the porch. As she stepped out of the car with her cane, he trotted up and leaned gently into her side. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You saved me," she whispered into his fur, "and you never left." Under the soft golden light of a late spring afternoon, Mia sat on her favorite wooden bench near the lake, the same place where everything had changed. The gentle wind brushed her hair across her face, and beside her, Rocky lay curled up, his head resting gently on her lap, his tail thumping softly with contentment. Her fingers moved slowly through his thick fur, a rhythm they both had come to find comfort in. It had been several months since the day she had rescued him from the cliff, and the day he, in turn, began rescuing her from everything she thought she had lost. Since then, life had shifted in ways she never thought possible. When the center offered to take Rocky back for reassignment, Mia had not even hesitated. She filled out the papers with steady hands, finalizing his permanent adoption. "He's not going anywhere," she had said simply. "Not this time." She and Rocky had found something rare, not just survival, not just recovery, but a partnership, rooted in a shared pain and a silent promise to never give up again. With the encouragement of friends and a few of the therapists from her old rehabilitation center, Mia launched a small YouTube channel called One Step, One Paw. The name was simple, but it carried the truth of every day she lived. Every small movement forward was enough. On the channel, she posted short clips of her life with Rocky. Morning routines, therapy sessions, quiet painting moments, even simple reflections from her porch swing. But what drew people in were not the aesthetics. It was the honesty. In one video, she sat facing the camera, Rocky lying beside her, and said, "I was told I would not climb again, and maybe they were right. But that day, I climbed a cliff, because he needed someone, and when I pulled him up, I realized I had pulled myself back too." The comment section of that video exploded. Messages from strangers poured in. One woman wrote, "I haven't left the house in 3 years since I lost my leg. After watching you and Rocky, I took my first walk to the mailbox." Another shared a video of herself learning to balance again after spinal surgery, saying, "If Mia can climb, I can try again too." And the most touching of all, a handwritten letter from a 13-year-old girl in a wheelchair. "You made me feel like maybe I could be someone's hero too." With the help of a nonprofit organization, Rocky began a structured retraining program to become a certified therapy dog. He passed with ease, his instincts sharp, his loyalty unmatched. Now, once a week, Mia and Rocky visited rehabilitation centers and support groups, including the very facility where Mia herself had once sat in silence, unsure of who she was. There she stood tall, not because her body had fully healed, but because her spirit had. She spoke about grief, about fear, about loss, and about how love, real love, unexpected and four-legged, can find us even when we believe we are unworthy. Rocky would rest at her feet, tail wagging gently, looking up at her not as a patient, but as someone he had chosen, and someone who had chosen him right back. And now, in the stillness of this quiet evening, Mia picked up her leather-bound journal and began to write. Her handwriting was slow but steady. "They said I could not climb again, but I did, and when I pulled him up, I pulled myself back too." She closed the book, leaned her head back, and looked at the open sky above the lake. No longer running from the past, no longer alone. Rocky let out a soft, contented sigh and nestled closer. They were not broken things anymore. They were home. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of healing, courage, and the unexpected bond between a woman who had lost her way and a dog who had once been left behind. Sometimes, it is not the loudest voices or the strongest legs that make a difference, but the quiet bravery of a single act and the loyalty of a heart that never gave up. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories, where we bring you real-life tales of animals and humans who find each other when the world turns its back and create miracles when no one is watching. Because sometimes the most amazing rescues go both ways. See you in the next story.